Hey everyone, my name's Nick Lambert. I'm the CEO of Doc and welcome to today's live event. Today we're going to be discussing how ID companies can speed up verification without increasing fraud. So as many of you will likely either be aware of or are hearing in the media, decentralized identity technology is a really hot topic in many kind of tech circles at the moment. And what we're going to try and do is, or what we're going to show you today is practical examples of how this type of decentralized identity technology can work. The types of companies we work in and work with and focus on are oftentimes within the kind of know your customer, KYC, identity verification, background check and biometrics space. So that's where this practical example is going to follow. And during this today's event, we'll look at the role of the ID wallet within this ecosystem and how it works. And also a big part of this is obviously the credential monetization. So creating business models around this technology, which in our view has been lacking until this point and has definitely hampered adoption of this technology. And also we need to do this in such a way where we are protecting holder privacy. So that's something that we need to get right to make sure that we can enable business models, but also very importantly, protect the identity of the holders or the individuals using these credentials. So today's session will last about an hour, roughly. It'll focus on 3 parts. So there'll be the kind of presentation itself, and I'll introduce Ewan and Richard from Doc are going to be running through that for us. And then we're going to have a couple of different Q&As. One will be questions that we see a lot ourselves in engaging with companies and just speaking with prospects and clients. And I'll be asking those questions to the guys as we go through. Hopefully they'll be of use to you. And then also we'll open it up for audience Q&A as well. So if you are joining us and you have a question that we've not answered or just something from left field that you want to know the answer to, please feel free to ask it in the Riverside chat within the web app where you're watching this. And our beautiful assistant Francisco, who's kind of hiding behind the scenes, will let us know and pick these questions, and we'll pose them to ourselves effectively as we go through and get those answers that you need. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you first of all to Ewan Miller. Ewan is our head of sales at Doc. And then following on from him is Richard Elspin. Richard is our head of product. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. I hope you get a lot out of this event. And without further ado, I'll pass over to you, Ewan.
Cheers, Nick. Yeah, excited to chat to you guys today. We've got some really exciting new things to show you. For people that are familiar with Doc, we're going to show you some things and some concepts that perhaps you're familiar with. And but there are also some new features that we're going to be talking about a bit later on. So what we're trying to do, let me share my screen first. Can you guys see? Yeah, great, awesome. So for people that I've spoken to, or as I say, people that follow our content, this slide will be familiar to you. And we're thinking about it from the KYC, background check, biometric provider context. So right now on the left-hand side, you've got your identity provider, and in a banking context, the customer comes onto the platform, they do that KYC check, and then they're onboarded to become a customer. And what we're trying to and that works really well today. There are lots of with the introduction of KYC that's created a load of efficiencies and solved a lot of problems for organizations and consumers. But what we're trying to do is add an extra layer on top of an existing solution, and you can call it many different things: SSI, decentralized identity, verifiable credentials, whatever. But with decentralized identity, what we're allowing organizations or those KYC providers to do is to do that check that they currently do, that the regulator tells them to do. But then what we're allowing them to do is then issue a credential and invite different verifiers to consume those credentials. And you could think about many different context, many different examples or use cases from which that could be useful. But in a banking context, you've got your, if you're a banking customer, you want to get verified, and then you get issued your credentials into your banking app. Then if the bank could create those connections with an airport, with a retail store, with a car rental, with a different subsidiary within the bank, which is where most organizations are starting inside an existing group, with an insurance company, how could that make that process quicker, faster, more efficient, but also not compromise security? And that's what we're talking to you about today. And the thing to remember, and I don't want to spend too much time on this slide because Rich is going to talk you through most of this, which is really exciting. But what we're going to show you is a demo, which sort of show you it working and in practice. And just to bring it all together, if you guys are familiar with verifiable credentials, you've got the issuer, the holder, and the verifier. That normal sort of triangle. But in this context and how we see it is that we're adding a sort of another layer on top, which is what we call an ecosystem administrator, which is here at the top, and we're calling them Clarity partners. But that could be that could be anyone, but in this context, it's going to be the KYC provider. And then we've got different participants that are going to be verifying, issuing, consuming those credentials. That provides a more quick, faster, efficient process that allows me to access services and value quicker and faster. And on the right hand side here, you've got the wallet, which Nick talked about. Now, what I'm showing you here is sort of the sales demo that we show to most customers, or most of our partners that we talk to will be familiar with this. And this is something that you guys could actually play around with yourself afterwards. But what we're going to do here, we're going to onboard to a bank, and then we're going to reuse those credentials to then get an auto loan inside the bank's ecosystem, inside the bank's current group, and then we're going to then revoke the credential, and then we're going to then apply for an apartment. So use that credential outside of the bank's environment and reuse the information that's just been verified. And what I'm showing you here is our white label app. So you can download the Doc Wallet today, and essentially you can white label this, change some color schemes, and you've got a working wallet and publish it into the App Store. We've created it and called it the Quotient Credit Union app, and we're just sort of mimicking a KYC process. So I'm doing my identity check. This isn't a real identity check, but we're just sort of mimicking that process. I'm going to fill out all of my information like I normally do. And then if you remember what I just talked about, you've got the Clarity Partners ecosystem, the KYC providers ecosystem. Now this UI, in the way that we've designed it, is just to make you see how it can all come together. But you could change this, or you could create the experience in the way that you think is right for you and your customers. But what we're then going to do is scan this QR code and tie the biometric to the credential itself. So every time I want to present that credential for verification, I have to use a biometric, which in this instance is my thumbprint, but it could easily be a facial recognition or something else. So here is, you're coming in here and it's asking you for your biometric information. You're going to say yes, this is selective disclosure, zero knowledge proofs working. I'm going to select the information that I want to share, and then I'm going to share it. And again, you can accept or decline this, the power of verifiable credentials, but we're going to share that. And what's happening in the background, or what we're trying to sort of represent, is the KYC check and all the identity checks that you're going to do that normally would happen in a KYC process. And then the credentials are then going to get sent into the app. And remember, most of the time, a bank or an organization, we're going to embed the wallet inside an existing application. So this is not sort of two separate apps. They're all working in the same environment. And here on the right hand side, you've got those 4 different credentials. You've got my biometric credential, you've got my bank identity, which is if you guys are in Scandinavia where I am, you've got bank ID. So something similar. And here it's got my verified information, and you see at the bottom you've got issued by the credit union, issued by the bank, but part of the Clarity Partners ecosystem. Again, we're using that ecosystem, that KYC provider in this use case, to bring these different participants together, because the ID validation is and the biometric check is sort of the component part. You can't do it in a silo. We're one piece of that puzzle. Now, what I'm then going to do is say 3-6 months later, and then going to apply for an auto loan. I'm going to log in, and I'm going to apply for a loan. Now, normally you'd have to fill out all that information again yourself manually, and then you would have to and then a KYC check would have to happen again. And what we're trying to say is that if you've got some verified data inside a secure app or a secure storage, if you could present that information and that you trust, could you pre-populate the form, allow that person to onboard to submit that application faster, and then do perhaps maybe a lighter check, or maybe not as not check all the things that you necessarily may need to, some of those redundant checks that aren't really required, and that could then allow the bank to sell more services and allow the consumer to have a better experience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scan the QR code. It's going to ask for my biometric to present the credential, which I've just done, and then it's going to ask for the 3 credentials that's required. And if I just scroll down, it says the 3 credentials required are the biometric, the customer identity, the bank identity, and then the credit score. I select the information that I want to share. I'm just going to share all the information. You don't have to, but for the sake of speed, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to select all that information. I'm going to press continue. It's going to check which information it wants to share. Again, the bank ID. I am a bank customer, it is me, it is my biometric, and I have the correct credit score. I'm going to share that. That verification is going to happen. That verification is successful, and you see on the left-hand side all the green ticks. All this information has been pre-populated with verified identity data. And then I would, in a real use case, in a real-world example, I press submit, and then a KYC check would happen, and then it would, allow me to or not allow me to get that loan. Again, you're making the customer experience better. You're not necessarily increasing yourself to fraud or opportunities to sort of manipulate the system, and you're allowing yourself to sell more services to your customers. Now, an important part is obviously revocation. Right, so a lot of if you're going to issue a credential, you need the ability to revoke it if for whatever reason that needs to happen. Now this all can be automated, but what we're trying to say, the only way that we can show you is if I manually click it. But we're going to revoke. So my say my credit score changes month over month. I'm going to revoke and issue myself with an updated piece of information, and on the right hand side, what you should see is a new credential should go into the wallet, which is here, which is great. And then my other credit score is then going to get revoked. So we're not necessarily giving you less control by having that data on the edge. You still have all the control that you need if you want to revoke any of that information that you've issued. And then, say if I then want to use that, again, if I, 3-4 months later, I need to then apply for an apartment, apply for a condo, I need to, there needs to be a check. That needs to happen again. I recently applied for an apartment, and it was a lot worse in Toronto when I lived there, but it's still pretty extensive here in Stockholm. Again, all of that information can be shared instantly if that connection has been made. So, very similar example. It's going to ask me for for 3 credentials. I'm going to provide that, use my biometric. I'm going to select the information that's required. I'm going to press continue, and I'll just select all the information for sake of speed. press continue. I'm going to share it. That verification is going to happen. It will then pre-populate the form on the left-hand side once that verification happens. And then I'm going to submit my application. Now here's an interesting one. Say if in that process, you wanted to then say, if you had a credit score over a certain amount, we could reduce the deposit. So you may not have to put as much money up front. But you need a credit score of a certain amount, over a certain amount. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to check if I have the right credit score. I'm going to try use the credential that's been revoked, and I press select and continue. And then I'm going to try share it. Now this takes just a little bit longer for some reason today. It's a live demo. This solution is working. You can download this today, but it will take a little bit of a while. It's then going to go verification failed because I've tried to use a credential that's been revoked and I don't have the right credit score to move on to that next step of the process. So you still, again, you're pushing that information to the edge, giving it to the user, but you're still allowing for, you're still allowing that customer experience to be good, but and provide better services to those people that you trust or have a better relationship with or whatever, but you're still not necessarily giving away that control that a lot of organizations worry about when they talk about pushing data to the user. And it's super important because, and it's not really possible, I'm sure some very bright technical person will tell me that it is at the end, but it really is only possible if you create a private ecosystem, an ecosystem from which you can trust. And that's right for certain use cases, and we're talking about the KYC example specifically. But that you have to create, there has to be an ecosystem administrator at the top, there has to be an orchestrator pulling those organizations together, and there has to be a control of which those relationships, who can verify what and who can issue what credential. And with the Doc platform, we can do that, which is really, really exciting. But there's one piece of the puzzle that's missing. I'm gonna pass it over to Richard. I would have a drum roll if we could, but we don't. So if just imagine that there's a drum roll happening, and I'll pass it over to Richard to take us onto the next step.
Yes, thank you, Ewan. And it's always nerve-wracking when we do a live demo, so I'm glad that went so smoothly. So what we're excited to announce today is our newest release. We over the past couple of weeks, we've released the ability to monetize credential verification, like Ewan was saying. This allows people to charge for the credentials that they issue within that closed ecosystem that's set up in certs. Until now, the burden of providing good, reliable information in an ecosystem was on the issuers. They had to validate that information and send it out, but there hasn't been a good way to ensure that the verifier who's getting the benefit of that good information is sharing some of that with the issuer, that business model is preserved. And so we have enabled that by using KVAC cryptography, KVAC. It's a way that allows us to ensure that the ecosystem's checked before a credential can be verified. So you can't tell the difference between somebody who's faking a credential. So if you're not an ecosystem member, you can't tell the difference between somebody who's faking information and valid information. So I'm going to share my screen really quick and be able to take you through how that shows up in the interface. Okay, so as Ewan was explaining, this is the certs interface, which is an administrator tool where you can come in and configure your ecosystem. And in this interface, we have the different participants Ewan talked about, and we can assign a verification fee for each of the schemas that we want to be charged in the ecosystem. So the ecosystem administrator can decide who joins the ecosystem, and when they join, you've signed up to that governance framework, which includes the I'm going to pay the fee for credentials, and then the ecosystem administrator can send out the bill later. And as you see on the right is my wallet with the same type of credentials. And here's a bank identity credential with Ewan's fake information. And down at the bottom, we can see that this belongs to that Clarity Partners ecosystem. It explains a little about what ecosystems are, and you can learn more about that ecosystem. And then it explains that this specific credential is ecosystem bound. It can only be used within the ecosystem. So the user's not burdened with details about the payment relationship, but they do understand this specific credential can only be shared with other people in the ecosystem. And then after the time of the issuance, you can, or when it's time for the ecosystem administrator to produce the report, you can come in and do that billing report, and then you can come in and it downloads as a CSV, a comma separated values file, and you can upload it into a spreadsheet like Excel. I'm using Google here, and you can come in and see each of the verifications that were completed. So you see which, the time it was completed, the schema it was completed, the verification ID you can provide to the verifier, and then they can look up the data in that verification. Who is the issuer, who is the verifier, and what was the cost associated with those credentials. So the verifier fee is what the verifier is told is the cost, and the platform fee is what Doc is the platform provider is going to take as our share. And that'll be negotiated depending on the ecosystem. Now what you'll notice is not here is anything about the holder. The user of the credential, the holder, their information is not provided to anybody except for the verifier. The ecosystem administrator and the issuer don't know who used what credential and at what time, but they do know that the cryptography ensures that the credential can only be used by somebody who's a member of the ecosystem and shows up here. And so the verifier, if they get nervous, am I really getting billed appropriately? They can take this verification ID and then go back through their verification history and look and say, when did that ID happen? And they can see, yes, this is the data I used. And of course, after they've consumed that, they'll purge it from our systems, but it's available for their records to ensure that they got billed appropriately. So in this way, we're trying to ensure that all the information is necessary for the ecosystem administrator to bill the verifiers, and then they can pay the issuers according to their agreements, while also ensuring that the holder's information is not spread around unduly, but kept within that holder verifier relationship where consent was provided. So that's how it ensures that privacy. Back to you, Nick.
Thank you for that, Richard, and also for Ewan as well. I think, like the guys are saying, live demos are always somewhat concerning, so we are glad that worked. It typically does work, but it's often when you want it to work the most that it tends to sometimes not work. So glad that went okay. And just to note as well, some of the performance, our production network is a lot more resources trained on it, and the test network upon which we're running that example is not as well resourced, so it tends to take a little bit longer. But the production network tends to be a lot faster than that, just so you guys are aware. So so this part, so that's the kind of presentation aspect. I really hope that was useful. I can see some questions coming in on Riverside, and Francisco, like I mentioned, will collate those and we'll ask them at the end. But again, if that presentation, if there's questions that it raised in your mind, please type them into Riverside and we'll do our best to get to them either at the end, or if we run out of time, we'll find another way to get that information to you as well. But hopefully the presentation itself was insightful, and we can now move into some of the questions that we often see. We thought this would be a useful thing to go through because it may well be that the questions that others have may answer the ones that you also have as well. One of the first ones that we see most often with regards particularly to the monetization of credentials is that coming up with business models around this technology is tricky. There's a great emphasis, as there should be, upon the holder's privacy. I mean, that's one of the big draws of this technology, is to really move the control away from centralized entities and back towards the individual, for them to kind of hold and manage their own credential data themselves securely. And so somewhat, maybe unsurprisingly, people do, when you start to monetize credentials, their first thought is, how do you protect holder privacy? So a very legitimate concern. And Richard, I know you talked a little bit about KVAC. Is there anything you can add to your your previous description that would help explain the steps that we take at Doc to try and ensure that holder privacy is maintained?
Yes, there's two layers to that privacy protection for the holder. The first layer I showed in the demo, which is that the holder information is just not shared. It's not captured. The KVAC protocol doesn't require it to be given to the ecosystem administrator. But the second, Ewan shared in his part, which is that some of those credentials, they have a label called selective disclosure. Those are credentials that use our advanced privacy preserving format. It uses a type of cryptography called BBS, and that allows you to ensure that no unnecessary data is being shared, and that the verifier is only receiving exactly what the holder's consented to provide.
Very good. Yeah, and there's more information as well as we go through. We'll obviously send this kind of video out afterwards, but we will have a load of documentation as well on these features. So people really want to dig in. If you're in the audience or you're watching this later on and you're technical and you want to know more of the deep technical details, please let us know, and we're certainly happy to share those with you as well. So the next question coming up, Richard, again, if I could impose on you again, is people wonder, how do we ensure that competitors, maybe of the ecosystem convener, for example, or the person that's orchestrating that ecosystem, how do we know that those competitors won't be able to verify credentials that they've issued?
Yes, and that is a concern we got from a lot of customers. Our first approach was allowed the holder to use that credential outside the ecosystem if they chose to, but some business models don't support that. Some situations that's not appropriate. And so that use of that KVAC cryptography means that the verifier, the holder presents part of the proof, but the verifier then has to check with the ecosystem administrator to get the other half of the proof. And so if the verifier is not in the ecosystem, then the rest of that key that's necessary to check that everything's valid, that the math works out, is not available. And so as long as the ecosystem administrator only allows people into the ecosystem that have that business relationship, then they're the only ones that can check and ensure that there's no fraudulent information, that nothing's been tampered with.
Got it. Yeah, that's very helpful. It is a very common question. And then maybe related to that as well, Richard, is the next question that might come to mind is, what if I want to take a credential outside of the ecosystem? What happens there?
Yeah. And when you use the monetized credential format that we talked about, that can't be used outside the ecosystem. But we do support those other formats, like the Doc Anonymous credentials, the BBS credential. And those are following W3C standards. So anybody who supports W3C verifiable credential standards can verify those credentials. We do allow you to create, we announced ecosystems in January, that's been around for a little while. If you use ecosystems without the payment piece, without the monetization piece, then it gives you a warning. Are you sure you want to use this credential outside the ecosystem? But it doesn't prevent the holder from doing that.
Yeah, so really the system's built to try and give the users of that system as many options as possible. So we're basically trying to build it around your own kind of desires and business models and processes, as opposed to imposing anything on you with this. So for those of you that start using it, hopefully that will become clear. Another one, and again, Richard, just because you're right in my eye line and we're already on this topic, who sets the price for a credential? Is it maybe the issuer, or is it maybe the ecosystem admin? Can you shed a little light on that for us?
Yeah, as I showed in the demo in the ecosystem, the admin adds the price to each schema, but the assumption is that the admin's bringing issuers into their ecosystem with a fee schedule, and so they're deciding along with the issuer what makes sense as far as that pricing goes and what the ecosystem admin's percentage should be. They're maintaining that ecosystem; they need to be incentivized to do that. And then the ecosystem admin is our customer who we're working with to decide on what our fee is going to be. So the listed price that shows up to the verifier, that's determined by the ecosystem admin within the context of the partners that they're bringing into that ecosystem.
And that also, because one thing we also get asked a lot, Richard, is about public versus private ecosystems as well. And it relates into a couple of questions that we've asked in this segment as well. And really our focus thus far has been on the private ecosystems because it's a good first step to make. We don't want to try and, well, it would be foolish to try and invent everything on day one, right? So you need to kind of ease our way into providing these capabilities. Is there anything you want to add about kind of private versus public ecosystems that you've not already mentioned?
Yes, and I think it's really good that you distinguish between those two because that creates a lot of confusion. Public ecosystems are generally triggered by industry consortiums or governments who say, in Europe, everybody's going to use this credential format. And that's important. We want the world to do that. But there's a real need in the market for my business relationships to be managed with verifiable credentials. And that's the tool we're bringing to market now. Over time, we have lots of ideas for expanding this and adding a lot of cool capabilities to it. But allowing you to say, I currently exchange value around my customer's identity information within my partner ecosystem. How do I automate that? How do I make it cleaner with better experience and more secure? That's the tool that we're providing today. And that closed model, it's really where we see the most demand in the short term. But as we see these standards get more broadly adopted, as we see governments sharing credentials with citizens, digital credentials that are verifiable, then it becomes easier for us to expand this model to interoperate with the public ecosystems.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, and as we talk about this stuff, online and start to look at feedback, which is really why we do it, to be honest, that really the feedback's super useful. But a question that we get asked a lot is, do the issuer and the verifier, do they need to negotiate the fee in advance? And like Richard was saying, actually, you can have credentials where there is no fee, but you can also obviously set the fee, which is obviously useful to have. But typically, you would set the fee in advance, and that's much more efficient because it saves that negotiation needing to take place every time. So you can basically just set the fees within your ecosystem. Obviously, those would be existing relationships, like we've mentioned, within a private ecosystem, and then the system just manages all that for you. So it means you don't have to keep going back and renegotiating fees. There's a set price that everyone understands, and if they want to play inside that ecosystem and use that data for verification, that's already pre-agreed. So much more efficient way of working. Another extension to that question is what happens if the verifier faces a fee and doesn't want to pay. So again, it doesn't stop the verification at that point in time. But when we go through the kind of the billing and the hopefully the payment that ensues after that, if at that point the verifier will refuse to pay, that will be something that will be dealt with in a out of system discussion between both the issuer and the verifier in exactly the same way as it's done today. So we're not changing anything there. If you have a verifier that's using your information and not willing to pay, that would just be something you'd have to deal with out of band. And that's still the case here. So I just wanted to clear those points up.
It might be worth noting, we originally looked at settling more of those payments on behalf of our customers, but the feedback we got was, I want to preserve my existing system. I already have an invoicing system. I don't want you taking that over. So we build a tool that doesn't get in the way of that. And in the future, we might look at automating more of that process. But for now, this is what people have been asking for.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, a lot of this technology we're building pretty much all of it is being built based on feedback. So if you have feedback either now or afterwards, please let us know, because it does shape the way that we implement a lot of these features. So it's really, really useful stuff for us. Coming to you, Ewan, because I've picked on Richard too much already, and this is probably more of your kind of area. What are Doc's business models around this feature that we offer to prospects?
The business model is really from our pricing model is trying to get out of the way as much as possible, so that our partners, our customers, can frame the conversation the way that they want, and that to what Richard says, the relationships that they currently have. I think right now, from a KYC perspective, I think the business model is they are still charging for, still billing and doing the same process, but then what they're then going to do is then charge or invoice their customers perhaps an additional fee, and then allow those, and then the sort of the revenue or the business model can then be around the verification fee, sort of allowing that credential to get used as many times as they like. And from our perspective, we're out of the way there. We're providing the infrastructure, we're providing the support and the issuance and everything else, and then that's all controlled by the ecosystem administrator. And we're trying to focus our solution, if I'm right, Richard, and I don't know if you agree, around the ecosystem administrator. It's how do we allow them to empower their customers to create value, and starting there, and then starting to understand as those more publicly wide, those infrastructures that have been built in the EU and in North America and elsewhere, how else, how that will be defined by the regulators and everything else. But we've got the sort of ecosystem administrator in mind as we price and as the solution's sort of being built. I don't know if you agree.
Yes, absolutely. The ecosystem administrator is the one, whether it's a KYC company or a biometric company, they're the ones that already have sources of data, partners who are producing data, and people who are consuming that data, relying parties. And we want to give them the tool that allows them to tie this all together in a clean, modern way, as opposed to having to create those ecosystems ourselves.
And often we've spoken to banks, some of the largest banks and other providers globally, and they usually put us in a bucket with other identity providers, which is why our go-to-market model, purely from a sales and partnership point of view, is about trying to work and understand how biometric providers and KYC providers want to play, and trying to position our solution that helps them but doesn't give away the benefits of what this technology brings, which is why monetization and verification in a privacy preserving way is the aha moment. And I think it's sometimes when we show the solution, when we show when Richard shows it and it takes like 5 minutes to show, and it's months and years of like work, and people don't really understand exactly how complicated it is. I think it does it a bit of a disservice, but this is a really important moment for our industry. I genuinely do believe that.
And I love it when we're talking to somebody and they say, well, I can't use verifiable credentials because it'll undermine my existing business. And we say, well, actually, we have a way to do that.
Yeah, it can really complement it as well. I think a lot of maybe some vendors maybe also recognize that the world is changing, that there is a momentum behind giving user the ability to control their own information. So it is really a case of needing to embrace it, because it is coming because of all the market drivers that we see regards AIDAS and MDLs in the US. That this stuff is coming along, and you either embrace it or you don't. And the consequences for not embracing it could be quite severe. But thanks for going over that business model stuff.
Sorry, Nick, just one thing on that. I think sometimes also people try to apply the technology in ways where perhaps it doesn't make sense. We're not trying to say this technology needs to be rolled out everywhere and everyone's going to be using credentials every day of their life. It's trying to spot, if you're listening to this, it's trying to spot the right opportunities, the right problem to solve, because credentials and this solution doesn't solve all of them. It solves some of them in partnership with the other pieces of the tech that are around today.
Yep, definitely. That's a good point. Shifting gears a little bit then into another question that we see often that's maybe sometimes misunderstood, which is just because something is maybe on a blockchain or in some kind of registry somewhere or within our system, for example, how do we know, how can the verifier be sure that the person presenting the credential is who they say they are? You could extend that argument as well to say, how do we know that any of the entities in the ecosystems are who they say they are? But if we focus maybe on the holder of the credential, the individual, Richard, could you explain that for the audience as well? How do we know they are who they say they are?
when I saw this question, I did put together a slide to try and explain it a little bit better. In the demo we showed, the bank issues a bank identity credential. And you saw that Ewan had to provide his thumbprint to create a biometric check credential before he could get the bank identity credential. And so when he provided that thumbprint, that's the first step on the left of this slide, an enrollment step. So integrated into the wallet, into the mobile app, is the biometric provider that says, I'm checking your thumbprint or your face scan or whatever it is. We have a partner who does signatures. And then it generates that biometric information and puts it into an enrollment credential. And what's nice is that means it only lives on the user's device. The biometric provider doesn't have to keep a giant honeypot, a giant database that could be a honeypot. Instead, it lives on the device, but because it's signed by the biometric provider, the credentials issued by them, it can't be tampered with. And so the next time the user needs to show a biometric, they can provide that credential back to the biometric provider, and that gets compared with a local biometric check, that second step. To verify, yes, the thumbprint I'm providing now, the face scan I'm providing now, does match what was provided at enrollment. After that local biometric check, we can provide that biometric check credential, which then allows us to say, look, there was a check in the last 30 seconds, 2 minutes, day, whatever we want it to be, that passed, that was issued by the following biometric provider. And that check credential can then be shared with anybody in the ecosystem. So in this example, it gets shared with that bank identity, with the Quotient Bank, and they can then put the biometric check attributes into the credential. We call them biometric binding attributes. And then when that credential gets shared with the verifier can say, look, I need to see a fresh biometric check credential alongside the bank identity credential that I'm seeing in order to make sure you're the same person that received the credential issuance time. So by making the biometric provider an issuer in the ecosystem, it allows you to use credentials just like any other credential. And all the integration happens on the device. The user data lives on the device. And you get all the benefits of secure biometric binding, biometric proofing of the user and binding to the issued information and the verified information without having the expense of every person in the ecosystem having to do the integration with the biometric provider, every participant in the ecosystem. And of course, the biometric provider can charge for the usage of their credentials, which allows them to get paid as it gets used in the ecosystem.
Excellent. Thanks for going through that, Richard. Perfect. And yeah, almost through to the audience questions now, but just a couple of last ones before we do that. Looking at you, and I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit just a moment ago, but in your eyes, like, are we saying here that decentralized identity is going to replace ID, identity verification and KYC? Are we talking more about it complementing these existing companies and industries?
Yeah, I mean, I can only talk from our perspective and the way that we speak to our biometric and KYC partners is that, just as Richard described, the biometric plugin and the fact that biometric providers can become issuers, we want them and need them in the ecosystem, and we need good verified identity data. So KYC providers can and must play a role, and it's trying to complement the decentralized identity part, which is what we feel like we do very well, in partnership with those identity access management, CAM, KYC biometric providers, and packaging up solutions that solve real problems for customers. And this is when it starts to get really exciting, because we actually have we've solved we've done it full circle, and now it's about providing a good UX for customers and solving real business problems in partnership with those biometric and KYC providers and the others that I've mentioned. So it starts to make it really, really interesting.
Got it. Yeah, and very much complementary, like you said. Okay, final question is, you and I know you love talking about wallets, and of course, when the guys were giving the demo there, the kind of right hand side of the screen was obviously a kind of a mobile an app using a kind of mobile wallet. you, and I know we talk about wallets an awful lot. Can you tell us if a company's out there wondering about how to use this, and do they need to stand up their own wallet for this? What's your thoughts about that for them? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's on a case-by-case basis. You do not have to provide a wallet. You can embed the wallet inside your environment, or how you are, that user journey that you have. Either that's inside a banking app or an app of some kind. We're just rolling out the cloud wallet for an appless experience, which is super exciting. So you definitely do not. We always get that question about, is it an EU compliant wallet? Is it an EIDAS compliant wallet? And there's lots of different bits when you're speaking to those European partners. So there's a lot to unpackage, but at a very high level, you absolutely do not. In some circumstances, you will need to build your own wallet, but the majority you will not need to necessarily change or make the user download an additional wallet in the journey.
Yeah, and it's use case specific, like you said. And there's other things that we're doing, Ewan, which I know is one that you is very close to your heart in terms of the options that we offer for wallets. So, we have kind of white label wallets. People can stand up their own. Are there any other kind of things up and coming, Ewan, that would cater for different use cases?
Yeah, the cloud wallet, as I said, I feel like the last piece of the puzzle. And Richard can definitely maybe at another stage sort of talk about what that really looks like. But yeah, I mean, we again, it's trying to get into that mindset that monetization and verification may not be of interest to you, or it may do. You may want to have the ability to revoke a credential, or you may not want to. But the technology needs to be there, and you need to be able to pick it up when you want to pick it up, and that is what Doc is trying to solve, and trying to be that provider for you, so you can create user journeys that are right for you and your customers, and you're not limited not in any way, but in perhaps as many ways as if Doc wasn't there.
Got it. Okay, very good. All right. So we've got 10 minutes left. We have good time for some of the audience questions. I will apologize in advance if I get your name wrong, which is quite often the case, but we'll get cracking. I'll ask out these questions. Richard, Ewan, I'll not focus them on any one of you. Please feel free to jump in if it's one that you feel that you want to answer. But hopefully at least one of you will jump in, because then I'd be forced to answer it, and nobody wants that. So the first question is from, I think, Yasin. He or she asks, can credentials be expired automatically, or is it a case of manual revocation? So either one of you.
Go for it, Rich. I've spoken a lot.
In that biometric credential that we use in the demo is a good example. There's 3 different ways to handle this. The first way is that the issuer says this credential expires at such and such a time. And so you saw that after like 5 minutes of the demo, the old credentials listed themselves as expired. The second way is that the verifier can look at the issuance date and say, I'm not going to trust anything older than X amount of time. And in this demo, you could see that it forced the biometric to be provided after like 30 seconds, even though the credential had a couple minutes before it expired. And then the third way is that revocation that Ewan demoed with the revoking the credit score credential. And he did that, like he said, he did that by pressing the button in the UI, so it was easy to demo, but that can be done over the API as well. And so that could be an automated service.
Often we found that, you're always going to put an expiry date on a credential, right? And it just depends on how valuable that credential is and how sensitive it is. So you may only want it out for a couple of weeks, or you may want it out there forever.
That's right. It can be use case specific. I think what we see in maybe in the KYC space, where maybe some of these credentials can have quite a short lifespan. If we move into things like education, maybe things like degree certificates, you probably would never put an expiry date on those, although you may want to revocate them if you found, for example, that someone maybe cheated on their exams or anything like that. So yeah, I think it's use case specific, isn't it?
So it's another example, like Ewan said, where we just want to stay out of your way and give you the tools to do whatever makes sense for you.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so during the demo, Abul is asking, you showed revocation happening, Ewan, and I think Abul's question, is it happening via the ecosystem partner Clarity in this case? So I think he's asking, is Clarity the one that's doing the revocation? But
I'm not 100% sure, but I will pass it over to Richard. He's nodding, and he's built the system, so I'll throw that over to...
In the demo, Clarity is the ecosystem administrator, the IDV vendor who's bringing everybody together. But the credit score company, Equinet, was the one that issues the credit score credential based on the privacy policy they have with the bank. So the user provides information to the bank shares it with Equinet. Equinet then pushed that credential directly into the wallet. The user never had to talk to Equinet. But then Equinet's in control to revoke that because they were the issuer, and to reissue the new credential, push it right into the wallet.
So the issuer is, hey, I'm even learning. So the issuer is revoking there in that example.
Correct.
Yeah, that's super important. That's super important, right? Like it has to work like that. Yeah.
Yeah. The ecosystem administrator, they don't have control over the revocation. That has to be done by the issuer.
It's a great question. I've never actually been asked that question. That's Thank you.
Props to you, Abul. Thanks for that question.
I'm glad he's paying close attention.
He certainly was. Richard, I think this one's probably for you because it is more of a kind of technical question, although we probably need to keep it fairly high level. Will is asking, what's the underlying infrastructure that powers both verification and issuance? Yeah,
we provide our software as a SaaS solution. So we're an AWS shop. We use Vercel to do deployments. And we can go ahead and, if you're interested, Ewan can set up a time. We can go through the technical architecture and in whatever detail you're interested in.
Very good. And if anyone's got any questions, I think as we go through, they want to speak to us about it afterwards, obviously go to doc.io. You can reach out. There's some kind of various forms on the site that you can fill in and let us know if you want a discussion really about anything that we're covering here. And also when we send out the kind of video after this event, I'm sure there'll be some links in there as well. So if we don't hit the depth that you want in the questions, or you want to talk about different aspects of it or get into a little bit more detail, please don't hesitate to reach out.
I'm on holiday. I'm on holiday from tomorrow as well, so make sure you get your questions in whilst I'm away. Nick and Richard can field those.
Happy to do it.
That depends on where we can manage that for sure. Thanks for getting that in, Ewan. You're going to make us all depressed now that we're not going on holiday. Lewis, I think, is asking who pays for that verification fee. So I can pick this one up. So the verification fee is being paid by the verifier. So the whole idea is that the verifier is the beneficiary of that credential being issued. They're able to use that verified data in such a way where presumably it's making them understand more about the person they're onboarding. That they can access that information very inexpensively, hopefully, and also it's information that they can trust because they know exactly who it came from, when, and who it's about. So they are very much the beneficiary of that whole process, and therefore they're the one that's paying that fee, and that fee goes back to people within that ecosystem. So it's making sure that transfer of value is working through the ecosystem, and that, in our view, is something that's not existing today in the world of kind of verifiable credentials and decentralized identity, and that's something that has been sorely lacking. I don't know, Richard, Ewan, if you had anything else that you wanted to add to that, or if we want to move on to the next question.
And that was a good answer.
All right. Okay, Cliff, did I miss pricing? Ewan, I'll pass that one to you.
Yeah, just at a very high level, like what Doc is trying to do, and it's pretty self-explanatory, is that we're trying to we price per issuance. Right, so the more you use the solution, the increase goes down, but the price per credential goes down significantly. So you get the economies of scale, but then we're trying to get it out of the way of verification and the monetization of verification. So the more credentials you issue, the more the more you use, the more you're going to pay for. But then we get out of the way of those credentials being used, because that's where you're getting, or your company or your organization is getting value. But we're releasing more and more features, and the product's developing. So if you think about it in a different way, we've spoken to hundreds of customers. We feel like that's the right way to do it, and it allows everyone to reap the benefit.
Yeah, there's some off-the-shelf pricing that you'll find on our website, Cliff. But yeah, for the most part, it is a a solution that's built around the requirements of who we're working with. And so more than likely, the best thing would be to do, if you're looking for a kind of more detailed understanding of the type of features and benefits that suit your use case, do get in touch with ultimately with you, and then we'll go through that with you. That's probably your best bet. All right, questions keep mounting up. We'll see what we can hit. We can put my teeth back in. We'll see which ones of these we can hit in the time that we have left, and we can maybe stay on a little bit extra as well. Shikar asks, you mentioned the term ecosystem. Is there a provision where different ecosystems could communicate with one another? And he's thinking about an example of a multi-tenancy environment. So Richard, maybe you can ask about, it sounds like we're talking about ecosystems being able to communicate with each other, not just within one siloed ecosystem.
Yeah, and I'll group this. I saw Abul asked a similar question about scale-up mechanisms and business models for ecosystems. And like Nick said, this closed ecosystem model meets a very specific business goal, but it's the start of a road of capabilities we can add. So I can't go into too much detail about our ecosystem roadmap because we got to get customers using what we got and listen to them. But I could see a future where you can recruit new people to your ecosystem, where you can see a marketplace of credentials that you might be interested in, where participants can recommend new issuers or verifiers, and where ecosystems can have partnerships between them. We could build all that stuff. It's just a question of what order do the customers need, and which customers have the business models to deploy it now.
Just think about that though, like how exciting that could be if you had 2 or 3 identity providers had created their own ecosystems and the value, and then allow them to connect with each other. And some of those bigger, larger enterprises that may want to do it on their own, that's a super exciting opportunity. We haven't built it yet. I get you can probably tell what I'm thinking or trying to tell Richard, trying to get Richard to do. But yeah,
we're taking baby steps. We're walking before we can run, I guess, would be the way that we might express this. We can see enormous potential, enormous upsides, but it's also trying to get something practical that we can use and test first, and then starting to scale that up. But yeah, it's the area is very, very exciting indeed. Hopefully that answers your question, guys. So Steve thinks of an environment where he has lost his or changed his device, I should say. What happens to the verifiable credential and the biometric that's tied to that in that instance? Richard, that's probably one for you, I think.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that when we talk about needing to deploy your own app, we've got on the roadmap the idea of a cloud wallet, so that you don't have to necessarily have your own app. One way that we see this cloud wallet getting used is some vendors, some of our partners want to embed that cloud wallet inside their app so that if you lose your data, if you lose your device, you don't lose your data. You can come back to the cloud wallet, re-authenticate with the same biometric, and be able to access that data. And it could live locally, and it could also live in the cloud. This is on our public roadmap. Our intention is for it to be end-to-end encrypted using the biometric as the key, so we cannot access that data. We do think, we have seen in the past that having the data on the edge on the device is really important for some of our customers. We don't plan on that going away in the short term, but we do see the value of the additional flexibility that this cloud wallet can provide for exactly those kind of recovery use cases.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Richard. DG, who's maybe concerned about his privacy as well, but DG is wondering about he's wondering about privacy within a SaaS environment. So we've packaged our solution up in SaaS because it's easy to use. When we started trying to commercialize way back when, and you're providing people with blockchain SDKs and things like that, it's pretty hard going. You need a lot of expertise, a lot of time to try and build something around that. So to make abstract away a lot of complexity, we've packaged it as a kind of inside a SaaS type environment. And so DG's question is about data privacy within that type of environment. I'm guessing probably maybe thinking about maybe some keys and also maybe about credential data potentially as well. Richard, do you have any kind of thoughts that you can pass over there to the steps that we take to look after privacy within the SaaS environment?
Yes, that's definitely a concern. As I mentioned with Cloud Wallet, we things are end-to-end encrypted. We don't want your data. We want you to keep your data. We do need to store your data long enough for you to consume it. Credentials are largely asynchronous, meaning that when the user provides the data, it might be a while before the human does the approval. So we then send that data to your system, and once you've confirmed receipt, then you can delete it from our servers. In the future, one of the requests we have, it's not on the formal roadmap yet, so don't hold me to it, but we have had requests to be able to allow you to store that data in your environment, our customer's environment, while we're doing the processing. So you get the benefits of easy SaaS deployments, easy SaaS maintenance, while maintaining that data within your environment. That's definitely something we've looked at. Yeah, go ahead, Ewan.
Yeah, no, and again, it just goes to the point, like, Doc isn't for everyone. We'd love it to be for everyone, but whenever we speak to very educated, highly skilled engineers, you can build it on your own if you wanted to. It would take you a lot of time, but we're trying to be that provider that packages it all up for you and reduces your costs and allow you to go to market quicker. There are pros and cons with both ways of doing it, and for us, that's the way that we're trying to help the industry by giving it all to you in one solution, and there's an upfront cost for that.
Great, thank you for that. And you, if you need to drop, I know you might need to get off. Richard and I can stay and pick off.
She cancelled my meeting, so we're all good. I can stay for a bit longer.
All right.
It might disappoint you guys,
Perfect.
but yeah, I can stay for a bit longer.
All right, we'll make sure to get you a question then. So we're getting through them pretty well. So Lode, Lode, is asking really whether doc credentials apply to just people, individuals, or can they also apply to companies? And I guess you could extend that question to say, could they also apply to things? So what do you guys think?
You and I are both talking at the same time. The product is designed for that experience where the holder is a human and a holder's involved. That's really where we shine. That said, I think we have 2 customers, at least maybe 3 now, who have customized the product for organizational credentials, and one customer who's been customized, doing a proof of concept with things as a holder. It's definitely possible the APIs allow it, but it hasn't been the focus of our user experience or of our current go-to-market strategy.
It's a great use case. It's just you can't get to everything. You can't get to everything all at once. There's so much value in that, and that'll definitely be the future, for sure. But
all right,
but yeah.
Yasin pops up with another question. I think they're asking, is the payment, I guess the verification payment, is that separate and not based on any type of chain payment, etc. for gas fees? So I can pick that one off. The answer to that is yes, it's separate. So we're literally abstracting away anything that would be happening with a chain or any kind of transactional costs, and literally the verifier is paying a predetermined kind of fiat value for verification that's established prior to kind of working together within that ecosystem. So that's completely separate and kept deliberately very simple. So no additional calculation for gas fees or any other kind of network fees that may apply. So we keep that fairly simple. So St. John is asking, what's the weight of the wallet? So I'm guessing the size of the wallet if embedded into an existing app. Technical detail there, Richard. I don't know if you have those specific figures to hand, or that's maybe be something we need to get to after the recording.
I don't actually have that specific figure. In the doc app is usable. Doc search is available, of course, with a free trial. There's a little contact support button. You press that, engineering will respond quite quickly. But I can say that one of the reasons why we're looking at that cloud wallet, why that's on our public roadmap, is for those situations where storing everything at the edge is too expensive or too heavy. We do have customers who are embedding it. It's a React native SDK. So if you're in React, then it's pretty clean. If you're using Flutter, we've tested that. Flutter doesn't add much to do React to Flutter as a web view. But if you've got a really lean native app, then it would be kind of chunky. And that's something that we're looking at.
All right. Thank you very much. 3 questions to go. Yasin is back again. Yasin, amazing with the questions. Thank you so much for sending all these in and taking the time. Yasin's asking, can an individual hold multiple DIDs in the same wallet or application?
The answer is yes. The default behavior currently is to use one DID just for simplicity's case, but depending on the use case, a customized, using our app SDK, you can have it create DIDs for every connection, create DIDs for every ecosystem. You have to figure out what makes sense for your model.
There are really cool use cases. We're working with a startup in Australia that wants to own credentials on other people's behalf. So that there's lots of different reasons why maybe you're a parent and you're looking after the identity of your child, or perhaps it's a healthcare use case and you're going for a prescription and you're the carer and the person can't go to the store and pick up the prescription. So having multiple holder DIDs inside the app is an important component.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Shakar, again, I think is asking, I know we're in the process of building it, so it's not something that exists right now today, but certainly something we're planning to have available in some form by the end of this quarter, the end of September. The question is, who will be the custodian of the keys in the cloud wallet? So I guess who's looking after the private keys in the cloud wallet?
Yeah.
Richard, do we know the answer to that?
To be clear, the issuer and verifier keys are held in the SaaS service. The cloud wallet we're talking about is for the holder. So it's the DID information and the link secret, the shared secret. And the answer is that those will be in the cloud wallet encrypted with the biometric. So depending on which ecosystem, which partner you're using, you can define what that biometric is, but there'll be a biometric key. There'll be a biometric provider that tells us, here's the decryption key that allows you to access everything. And then once you're in, we can access those keys in order to process information on your behalf.
Perfect. Okay, Adam, you have the privilege of the final question. I'm reading it. I'm not sure I'm necessarily understanding it all, so let me read it out anyway. When we're showing the demo, Adam is asking, it was clear that we're playing the various roles of the issuer and verifier, and then obviously also the holder of the credential. And he's asking what commercial providers are currently able to offer verifier services. Okay, so yeah, I guess that question I can probably pick off is that if you're a verifier today, you can join an ecosystem either because you're invited into one by an ecosystem convener, or you're in the role where you actually might want to start your own ecosystem and bring in issuing partners into that ecosystem, as well as verifying those yourself and maybe other verification partners. So I guess any commercial verifier can actually enter an ecosystem if they're invited at the moment, and that's the distinction again between that private ecosystem that we currently provide. I think in future we can imagine a world where you maybe have more open ecosystems, and that may create more opportunity for those more kind of transient or reactive relationships. But for now, it would need to be one that you're invited into. I think that's the crux of your question. Hopefully that was what you're looking for, Adam. I don't know, Richard, or you, and if you read that one differently.
I mean, I would, yeah. I mean, you could tell by the way that we're building the system and the way that we're talking that we need ecosystems to be built. There are lots of organizations that want to be able to consume them. But we need to create the ecosystem first, and focus on the ones that can, and where the most value can be, how they can derive that value. Over the next year or so, you will see multiple, and then it starts to get, and then the verifiers come in. So right now there's not that much of an opportunity. There may be some. But right now it's the role the ecosystem administrators needs to step up and get going, and then then your organization or your role to play will start to become clearer.
Yeah, and
perfect.
It's clear from our tooling. We're very focused on that closed ecosystem, easy administration, closed ecosystems. That's a very distinctive offering for us. It's also our new set of features. The tools allowed verifiers to sign up for a very long time. So you don't have to be in an ecosystem to sign up as a verifier. And like Ewan said, the actual credential formats, they're standards compliant. You can verify without using our stack if that's your choice. We do have open source libraries for our credential formats you can use to verify if you don't want to sign up as a customer. So there's lots of places where verifiers can get involved, but the challenge today is getting high quality credentials issued, like Ewan said. So that's our focus.
Perfect. We've run on a good bit, and that's great to see because there's obviously a lot of interest. There's a ton of people on this presentation, which is really great to see. Lots and lots of questions as well. So I really appreciate everyone engaging with us. And that's a wrap for today. We'll be sending this out on demand. So if you signed up for this event, we'll certainly get that to you. If for whatever reason you don't receive it or you haven't signed up, please do just get in touch and let us know, and we'll be happy to send that out to you. I'm sure we'll publish it on YouTube and some of our other social channels as well. So that was how ID companies can speed up verification without increasing fraud. And yeah, if you want to also speak to Ewan and anyone in his team regards how we can fit this around your own specific requirements, more than happy to do that. So thanks to everyone for taking part and for watching. Thank you also to you, Ewan, and also to Richard. And I bid you all a good night. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.